So, some of you said last night that you have done centering prayer. How many of you have done centering prayer? Well, that's great. So, but some of you don't know how to do it or haven't done it, so this will hopefully be a good experience for you. Yes.
Could you give a quick
Well, I'm going to.
what it is?
Yeah, of course. And I lead a centering prayer group in my parish, as I had at my previous parishes on Monday evenings. So I'm quite familiar with this. And in fact, I have the centering prayer brochures here. So, which I won't give you now. I'm going to give you a live presentation. But if those of you who are familiar with it and or would like one of these, you can take them at the end of the session this morning, and then practice for yourself. Yes.
And there are several books upstairs on centering prayer.
Right, that's right. There's a whole shelf there on contemplation. That's also where Richard Rohr's books are in the bookstore upstairs. There's also some stuff on centering prayer and contemplation. Thomas Keating, for example, is the primary representative of that currently. He lives in Snowmass, Trappist monastery in Colorado, and that's where I had some of my first Zen sessions. So he's all been in this dialogue of East and West for many decades.
He just celebrated his birthday on March 7. He's 91.
91, yeah, right. About 90. He's still going strong, physically and certainly mentally. So we'll do a 20-minute, at least 20-minute, which is customary, the 20-minute meditation. So the idea, of course, is to go beyond words, images, thoughts, feelings. In this practice, which is based, someone mentioned the cloud of unknowing yesterday. That was the direct inspiration. And the Trappists back in the 70s developed the centering prayer movement precisely in response, to Paul VI, who asked the Jesuits to combat atheism. He asked the Cistercians to, resurrect contemplations for the church. So they were inspired by that Christian document. You find some currents in the church today, believe it or not, that think this is, really just yoga in disguise. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. But it isn't, At my current church, I had, one or two people who were, looking, with knitted eyebrows at this thing, and then until I explained, gave the history of it, and that was the end of the criticism, because it's directly from our Christian tradition. As I said earlier, we've lost our contemplative thread. We've lost our Christian mystical tradition. We have to go back, not just to the cloud of unknowing, which I think is 15th century or 14th century, but we have to go back to not only into the Middle Ages, the fathers of the church, and the great contemplatives. So this is what we're trying to reconnect then with our own spiritual tradition here. And God is as beyond words, beyond knowledge, beyond any kind of definition, as St. John Chrysostom pointed out in one of his treatises. So this goes all the way back. That God is really beyond all this. No name can capture God. You can use 99 names, as the Muslims say, for God, because there's so many you can use, but none is adequate. So we try to go beyond all that. So this is the technique in centering prayer. Are any of you familiar with the John Main World Community of Christian Meditation? So that's a slightly different way, where you use a word as a mantra. In centering prayer, what you do is and that's fine. In centering prayer, what you do is you select what's called a sacred word. It explains it there. You take a sacred word, which is one or two syllable word. Faith, Jesus, love, silence, Mary, whatever it might be. One or two words. Let go, even. Which you don't meditate on. You don't use, because we're trying to get beyond words. But you do use it as a tool to focus or refocus on the silent presence of God within. Call it what you want, the indwelling of the Trinity, the presence of Jesus, the presence of the Spirit, the fact that God is within. Right here, present, here and now, as it said. And as Catholic theology has always said. So we try to rejoin that presence, but as St. John of the Cross says, in pure faith. Because faith, as John says, is the only direct, adequate means of union with God. The kind of faith we talked about earlier this morning, which is that entrusting, the letting go, you can use the word let go, into God, surrendering of yourself. Once there, in that attitude, that presence, you're, as he says, Thomas Keating says, you're consenting to the presence within. It's beyond words, because again, as John of the Cross said very beautifully, God only speaks one word. His word, Jesus, second, however you want it, in silence. You know, when the Father generates the Son, or God speaks the Word, or John's prologue speaks about the Word that was with God there's no noise, not even hallelujah. It's silent. So if we want to, if we want to sink into that mystery, or allow that mystery to penetrate us, then we need to be silent too, as he says. So that's the rationale behind it, to rejoin that God beyond all feelings, words, images, by going beyond all those things. And as you will discover, if you haven't discovered already in your life and practice, what the Buddhists cleverly call the monkey mind, chattering up in the trees and jumping from branch to branch and creating all sorts of commotion all the time, that's your mind. In case you didn't notice, you will notice quickly that you can't just tell it to be quiet. Monkeys don't obey you. So that's the point of the focusing word. You don't meditate on the content of the word, but you just use it, kind of fighting fire with fire, staying on this word level, and then using it to refocus on the silence. So every time, and there will be many, that your mind goes off, or your feelings go off, or whatever, your images go, then you kind of quietly, without recrimination, without scolding yourself as to what's that going on, you just come back quietly to the word and to the silence as best you can. So you're consenting to the presence and activity, as Thomas Keating says, of God within you, whatever it is, whatever happens. And maybe nothing will happen, but as the Buddhists know, nothing is the best thing that can happen. The Kabbalah knows that too, but we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So whatever happens, whatever's there, you just are present to it. And come back. So the posture, we do have mats and cushions over here. They provided for us in case any of you prefers to sit on those. Do use a mat as well as a cushion, so you don't, and you can put them around the sides here, over there, whenever there's room. That's fine if you prefer to use that. Otherwise, if you're sitting on a chair, just make sure that your feet are flat on the floor, that as far as possible you're forming a 90-degree angle with your knees and your hips and your body here. Many people choose to sit on the front third of the seat to make sure you're sitting straight and alert. If you want to sit all the way back for more support, just make sure that you're not slouching back or like this, but that the small of your back is pushed in so that your belly is protruding slightly so you can breathe more freely. And you're maintaining the posture as best you can of an erect spine. The best preferable, you do a meditation posture like this if you like, but more commonly you just put your palms flat on your thighs, and your head should be level. Really important is that you should be relaxed. Your spine should be very carefully rooted and erect, but all your muscles should be relaxed. Your shoulders should be back to keep the posture, but not tense. And they should just be sinking down, and back. Your arms should be relaxed. Your neck muscles. You can do a little body check, spot body check to check to see if you're relaxed. The last bastion of tension is usually your jaw. You just try and keep your mouth also relaxed. If you prefer, you can keep the tip of your tongue behind the top of behind your top teeth. That's just a little trick for the energy flow. But the main thing is to keep
Behind the top teeth?
Yes. Again, without tension, just relax. And in centering prayer, more often people close their eyes, so if you want to do that. But the important thing is to be focused then just on the silence and to use the word. As Thomas Keating says, it is possible, but generally not recommended for beginners, but in centering prayer. But you can just use your breath as a way of refocusing instead of a word. But in any case, you should revert to the silence constantly and stay there as best you can. Any questions on the posture? Those of you who are on a mat, well, are you used to sitting this way, you guys? All right, I'll have more to say about that when we do Zen this afternoon. But if you can sustain that the way you are for 20 minutes, okay. Because it is important also, lest I forget, try not to move, try not to sneeze or cough or sniffle. I mean, if you do, fine. I mean, it's not the end of the world for you or anybody else. But just try and remain calm and try not to move during the time, because that tends to scatter your energy, scatter your focus, and possibly distract someone else. So, any questions on the posture or on the goal or the practice? Okay, so it's just 11 now or a little after. So I'll ring this big gong 3 times to start, and then we'll do for 20 minutes, and then 3 times at the end. In fact, what I'm going to do just before we start, I'm going to sing a Gregorian chant. That's what I do in my group at my parish, as just to kind of set the mood, set the tone, to relax a little bit and help you go in, and then I'll do the gong. Okay. Many of us have gone past a certain age, so this is from Psalm 71, the psalm of an older person, saying, "You've been my help, my hope, O God, from my youth, and you, I've leaned from birth, from my mother's womb, you have been my strength." a second to come back to the room. You'll have an opportunity to share or just experience Zen meditation this afternoon and compare the two. But for the moment, does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to share about their experience right now? Any remark you'd like to make? Exclamation, beatitude, confusion, or any question about it before we move on? I know you're still kind of floating. Yeah.
I hadn't done centering prayer for about 10 years, so what surprised me is how fast the time went. I don't know if I fell asleep or not, but it just really seemed very fast.
Yes, how quickly the time, that's a common experience, that the time goes very fast. I mean, sometimes if you're in a different space, it can go very slowly, but often it goes very fast. And it's not surprising when you consider you're entering into a more kind of a timeless place, like that eternal now, and so time disappears. Time is only an illusion, and ultimately, there's so much else, like yourself. So it's good to experience that. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, this is really the first time I've tried to do this, and I felt like there were times when I just wasn't even aware of my body. It felt like I didn't even have a body.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be the effect. Other times one is very aware of energy in the body in one way or another. But it can happen that you're kind of just so aware that, well, to use the expression of Dogen, the great Zen master, body and mind fall away, drop off. It's like you're in a different dimension, even though everything is integrated there. Your consciousness is different. Yes.
I don't know if I was doing it right, but when I started thinking, I'd go to that word I chose and then try to think of nothing. Now, was that the point of it or no?
Well, no. So as soon as you said you were thinking, then that wasn't the right way. Because we don't. In a sense, we don't really even think of the word. The word is just kind of a tool. Yeah. But no, we don't try to think of nothing. Because if we try to think of nothing, we're already thinking. And you're going to be thinking about nothing. So the whole point is to not to engage thought, even to think, oh, I'm going to try to not think, or don't chase away your thoughts, as Thomas Keating points out. You just go actually think, imagine, go beyond, go underneath them, go deeper, go beneath. Thomas Burton used the image, and I think he got it from the fathers of the church, like fish just below the surface of the sea, where there's light and the movement. You get to go down deeper into the ocean, where it's darker and more silent and less movement, and actually where there are a lot of monsters. But that's for another stage. What you encountered down there. But yes.
I had a physical sensation in the front of my head. It was
Yes.
kind of scary.
Yes.
It almost was painful, and it would come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried a little while to just kind of hold it there, and then it went away. But
Yeah, well, focusing on it can actually dissipate it. That's right. That's a good instinct. That kind of thing is common, especially for those who aren't too used to it. That certain blockages or certain things in your body where there could be blockage of some kind, where you get focused on a sensation in a particular part of your body, or you can feel cold or hot, that kind of thing as well. So if that were a continuous thing, that would mean there is some kind of blockage here. One strategy would also be, I think you did a good thing, focusing and dissipated, but you can also go down into the heart, just kind of focus more there, kind of let things flow more. As you meditate, it's good to get familiar with the chakra system, if so many of you are, and it's very, very helpful. It's not just Hindu, it's normal and natural, it's the way we're actually made, and so that kind of thing can help both to diagnose and to treat, so to speak, the blockages that can come up. Yes?
I was surprised to discover how resistant my body has been to relaxing, especially since that was the whole point of that.
Yeah, of course, I'm not saying you do this, but if we try to relax and we get all tense about relaxing, we have to relax. But yeah, if we're used to carrying a lot of tension in our body, or, which happens, remember the pain body that Eckhart Tolle talks about, where we actually identify, put our identity in our pain. We feed on it, as strange as that may seem. I'm not saying that's you, but I mean, we can't easily identify, hold on to the tension in our body and be actually afraid of letting it go, not to mention unable. So that's where you have to try to trust a little bit more in God and the goodness of reality, and kind of let go. That's where, again, back to let go, which is that movement of faith into something bigger. But that's why one reason this kind of meditation is really good, because it makes us aware of where the blockages are and where the resistance is. We might not be conscious of in our daily lives. So that's it's a whole journey you're undertaking really when you start doing this. Psychotherapy and prayer are both good. Yes, first.
I just had just a couple of times like a light up here. It just kind of came and went.
Well, if it's not a migraine, then it's actually, I'm not saying that's what it was, but I mean, it can happen, that your third eye,
Well, that was my next thing I was going to say.
it can actually pulsate.
I know.
I saw that.
It can pulsate in this kind of exercise. But again, we don't try to focus on it too much. We just let it be.
Well, like it just kind of went. And then
Yeah. But it's true. It can happen. Yes.
This is all very new to me, and I don't know, I'm very active in our parish, but I don't know if anyone there that's doing all this, what will they think if
Well-
they've heard of this?
Well, who cares what they think? Who cares? On the other hand, what do you think? It's going to be your journey, and if you
It's
become,
totally new to me.
yeah, right. And
That way.
I'm not surprised. I've been saying, we haven't taught this. So you can, if you get enthused by it, you can preach the gospel. Bring the message to others who might be interested. Who you think that start a centering prayer group or something like that. But yes, it is new. Unfortunately, it's very new to many people.
Well,
Whereas with someone,
I'm learning more, so.
yeah, it is a part of our tradition, though, as I say. Yes.
I think you would be surprised. It happened in our church when you say you're going to have a centering prayer and there's someone leading it. A lot more people show up than you think. But you did a lovely thing when you started because you were chanting a song.
Yes, Gregorian chant.
Yeah, so that was really, because sometimes they, they'll do scripture and they'll
That's what they usually do.
repeat it 3 times.
That's right. That's the usual technique. I found that chant is better
Yeah.
for setting the tone. It's still scripture, but it brings you to a different and as with many Buddhist chants, you should be following kind of the general tone and the rhythm of it more than the actual words.
Well, that's what because so many people would say, are we supposed to concentrate
Yeah.
on the message, the
Right.
words?
Right. That's an issue. Yeah. Whereas you shouldn't be meditating on the scripture you've just read. It's just really to set the stage, set the tone. Yes.
To her point, though, there is a centering prayer technique called Lectio Divina that does pretty much what you're referring to.
Oh yeah, well, Lectio Divina, which is divine reading, which is actually taking the scripture and meditating on it. If that's what you're doing during the reading of the scripture, in the sense, that's great, that's fine, But when you get to the actual centering prayer, then you shouldn't be doing that anymore. It can be a preparation for centering prayer or a follow-up to. Same with Ignatian meditation. You take a scripture passage, go through it, and then you do the meditation, and then do a follow-up. But it shouldn't be the content of the centering prayer.
One other comment, for someone who has failed at this over 30 years, for those of you who haven't done it before, you have to make this a habit.
Yeah.
You have to do it every day, and you try to do it at the same time if possible.
Yeah, it's
And don't-
preferable to be regular and as
Right.
frequent. I often tell people, though, whether it's Zen or centering prayer, it's almost more important to be regular than to be frequent. Like if you did it every other day but faithfully, then that would bear some fruit. But if you do it like 2 hours once every month, well, that's not going to do good, not much good anyway. So yeah, do try and be regular with it if you can. It's helpful for reorganizing your inner world.
He has a question.
rediscovering.
I just wanted to say, I haven't done group meditation for quite a while, and I found myself going a lot deeper.
Yes, very good point. That's in the Buddhist tradition as well. It's called the Sangha, one of the great treasures. You have the Buddha, the Dharma, which is the teaching and the reality of things, and then the Sangha, which is the group, the monastery, or the meditation group. So also with centering prayer, it's the church, it's the church community. So the support of the group for, raising the energy level, if you like, and the mutual support, and since we're all connected and more immediately, obviously connected, that does often have a very good effect, and you see the beauty and the usefulness, utility of it. Anyone else on that?
I've never really thought of focusing on one word, and when I was trying to focus on one word, not focus, but repeat the one word, I wasn't in a rhythm, but I haven't meditated in about 6 years. And when I used to meditate, I always did set Om Mani Padme Hum.
You use the mantra, yeah.
Is that, I mean, you said before there's more about the rhythm, is that okay for centering prayer, or should I?
Well, I mean, we talked about the rhythm, I meant the regularity of practice, but for centering prayer, as I say, the John May method actually uses a mantra, usually Maranatha. So it's not bad to use a mantra in meditation, and that's a Buddhist. Using the original Sanskrit, which I use occasionally myself, but not for centering prayer.
Okay, that's what I was. That was my question. Because I've never done centering.
Yeah, you don't, in this particular method anyway, you don't focus on a word. Even when you're doing a mantra, you're not exactly focusing on the word. You're getting into, a rhythm which the words take you, to a depth where the words take you. But as I understand it, but for centering prayer, no, you don't focus on the word. You just use the word as a tool to refocus on silence and on the present. That's the idea. Yeah.
One thing that I found very helpful is when you get a thought, is letting go, let go.
Yeah.
Just like if your hands were all clenched,
Yeah.
you get a thought, you just let it go. You don't concentrate, like sometimes that word gets in the way.
Yeah, can.
And,
Yeah.
so, but that image of just let it go, just let it go.
Use that as your word too.
Letting it go.
Yeah, that's why I say also don't engage the thought. Don't try to chase them away. Like chasing monkeys away, they just get caught up in chasing monkeys instead of just going deeper and letting go of the thought and letting go of everything else that's holding you back. Yeah.
I don't know how this seems can work, like, sometimes when you're engaged in something, it doesn't have to be work, that really just focuses,
Sure.
centers you.
Yeah.
Is that contemplative in a way, because you're not.
If you're really present, if you're doing what you're doing, as
really,
St. Ignatius
really
says,
present.
Ajikwarajis, which is do what you're doing. And that's very Buddhist, very Zen as well. If you're totally present to what you're doing. There's a wonderful koan, wonderful story in the Zen tradition, in the Monkan, the Gateless Gate collection, where a young monk comes to Joshu, the master, and says, okay, teach me, what's it all about? What's the Buddha? And Joshu says, well, have you had breakfast? And he says, yeah. And Joshu says, well, go wash your bowl. So if you really are truly present, washing the bowl, washing the bowl, you're enlightened. So that's the teaching right there. It's right here now. So yes, they call that samu in Zen practice, but you're really present to the work you're doing every day, and that's its own form of practice.
What do they call it?
Samu, it's the Japanese word. Yeah. So yeah, that's what Ignatius means by contemplation in action. You should be able to be being contemplative. Not that you're praying in some special way while you're acting. No, but you're really, really awake as you're acting. Then there's the Holy Spirit's at work. You're awake. Everything is working right then and there, and that is prayer.
Just found it a beautiful small book by Brother Lawrence.
Presence of God.
Practicing the presence of God. That's a beautiful book.
Yeah, he's one of the most Zen Christians around.
Yes.
Practicing the presence of God in the moment. Brother Lawrence. Yeah, it's a couple centuries old.
1700.
Yeah, 1700.
It's beautiful, and it's only about 100 pages, so it's not a long read.
Another one, Dokosad, abandonment to divine providence, has the same idea that at every single moment, whatever is happening is what's supposed to be happening, and you can learn from it and be totally engaged with it. Same idea, same experience. Well, good. You're all obviously very astute contemplatives, so we'll make sure we have our practice this afternoon. You can go back to your seats if you prefer, or stay on your mats, but we'll go back there for the Zen this afternoon. So as I said earlier, after this break, after this prayer, what I'd like to do for most of the rest of the session before lunch is talk about, the moral path, which is, in a sense, there is no path, there's no way, but that's a way. There's again, to refer to that same collection of koans, the very last one, the 40th one in that, this is 48th one. In that one is, in that group of koans, is called Kempo's stick, and there the monks are asking the master, what is the way? What's the way we should follow? And he takes his stick, and it's not sure exactly where he's doing this, but I imagine he's doing it in the air. He just draws a line with his stick. That's the way. And what he seems to be saying with that is, right here, now, that's the way. You don't have to find some path or follow some other path. Or, just be really awake right here and now. And if you're really awake, then because of the organic connection of everything, especially in your consciousness, you'll spontaneously know what to do. Now this has been very underemphasized in our Catholic tradition, although it's there. It's called the gift of counsel of the Holy Spirit, working with the cardinal virtue of prudence. Now, I'm sure you've never heard that. And that goes back to Aristotle, actually. That's where Thomas gets the idea of this knowing what to do just spontaneously because, you've got this insight based on your experience. So prudence, gives you, a good sense, of what the general situations are and what should be done. But it's that gift of counsel associated with that virtue, which lets you know, this is exactly what I should do in this situation. It's just spontaneous. And it's just, we're all given the gifts of the Spirit in confirmation and baptism, as we've said. This should be more, so instead of, in other words, my point is, we should be more Zen, which is really saying more traditionally Christian in our moral life, which is saying, what is the situation right here and now, that line in the air with the stick, and what spontaneously comes out of the situation is my response. Pull out the arrow, whether it's in your own chest or somebody else's. Exercise compassion, which is the thread and the stuff of the universe. Let all that flow spontaneously through you, and that's being truly moral. Well, I'm just starting here, but...
Oh, okay, but so what's the paradox in my head is it just seems like when I think of the Christian faith, it is all about constructs and structures to give the path, to say this is the way, do not vary, this is the blueprint, the step-by-step, period. There's no, don't question it, just follow it. So.
Well, that's as with most things, well, let's put it this way, again, to use Richard Rohr's idea, in the first half of life, to use this falling upward idea from the second half, you are supposed to set up the structure and the rules and the boundaries and the institutions and start people along the way. And everybody, anybody who has kids and teenagers knows, you got to give them some boundaries. You got to give them some laws and some structure. They want it. They need it. And so do we all in a certain stage of life. But the problem is we stayed there. Both in our presentation in church, we're great with catechism, up until they're 13, but as soon as you're an adult, who's telling adults how to behave? I mean, in a mature way. We're showing them the path. So those, and I'm going to come back to them in just a second, in both traditions you've got, rules and structures, but then the real goal, and this is something my teacher's teacher in the Zen tradition, Bernie Glassman, Roshi Bernie Glassman, who was originally Jewish, and still maintains that connection and that approach. Is often pointing out, that we have to relate to the situation as it is. For example, in Christianity, as St. Thomas pointed out, the basic moral rule is do good and avoid evil. Not too helpful in terms of specifics, but it's a very great, way to do good and avoid evil. Exactly the same in Buddhism. You have kind of the three basic precepts of avoid evil, do good, and do good to others. And the way Bernie interprets that is be present, listen. Avoid evil by listening. Don't stuff your own ideas and a prioris and agendas on other people. Be really present, therefore, to the situation, to people, and then the do good to others will follow authentically because you're really responding to their needs and not your own issues or your own agendas. So he takes kind of that same approach. The basic do good to others has to actually take shape and form from the situation as it presents itself. Call it situation ethics in the good sense, which is very, very Christian, as I say. Respond to the actual needs of the situation as they arise. And you may be surprised in the process. Now, if you do go to the rules, remember the Four Noble Truths. The third noble truth is there's a way out of this suffering we create by clinging in the inadequacy of the world, those first truths. That's the third truth. There's a way out. And the fourth truth is, this is the way you should follow the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. Now one of the books that presents this in a good way, and it's a very basic textbook, which I've used with high schoolers when I've given lectures to them on Buddhism and Christianity, is Houston Smith's The World's Religions, very classic text. It's really very good. I was surprised how good it was on Christianity. It really is good on all the religions, but I used it especially for Buddhism, and he presents a good explanation also of the Eightfold Path. And you may not be too content if you haven't heard it before. It speaks about right views, right perspectives, right intent. This is the pure motivation pure motive in our Christian asceticism. Right intent, right speech, because you can do a speech sin by all these, thought, word, and deed. Right speech, right conduct. Again, not too specific, eh? I'll come back to that in a second. Right livelihood. This is good, very modern sounding. Make sure the job you do is actually furthering the good stewardship of the world and the kingdom of God, and not making it worse. Corporations and things. Right effort. Put in the necessary energy. And then the two last ones are right mindfulness and right concentration. Interesting. So there's a lot of emphasis right on in those basic rules about meditation, about inner awareness. We don't have that in our Christian tradition as clearly and as upfront, and I think that's a lack. Here, he brings under right conduct. He presents very well under that heading what are kind of the five precepts. There are all sorts of lists of precepts in Buddhism, although there's no systematic moral theology. Then maybe this is why, because it's trying to respond to the immediacy of the situation each time. But there was a whole conference on that very subject. Why is there no moral philosophy, ethical system in Buddhism? A conference given by Robert Thurman right next door at Columbia a few years ago in 2011. Robert Thurman is a Tibetan Buddhist scholar, and his daughter is Robert Thurman. You know the story. So the precepts are: do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not be unchaste. 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? 10 Commandments are right there. 5, 6, 7, and 8. Do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not be unchaste, do not steal, and do not lie. Bear false witness. And the fifth one, do not drink intoxicants. Wait a minute. All right, even modern Buddhists, I know some, will be unchaste. Again, what in your circumstances is responsible conduct with sex or with alcohol, whatever it might be. So it's left open, but there's obviously a caution there. Houston Smith has an interesting commentary on the do not drink intoxicants. It is reported that an early Russian czar, faced with a decision as to whether to choose Christianity, Islam, or Buddhism for his people, rejected Christianity and Islam because both included this proscription. Islam and Buddhism. He rejected the latter two, Islam and Buddhism, because they included this proscription. You've often heard it said, "I'm Catholic, I like to drink." But it's, I think it's important there again to follow that notion of what is responsible behavior. And my take on this is that you need a lot of psychological maturity, which an enlightenment experience doesn't necessarily give you, not automatically. And you need, I think, a good moral philosophy, in fact, in order to do this well. Why do I say that? Well, look, there's a lot of, as you may know, there have been a lot of scandals over the last several decades, both in the Tibetan Buddhist and the Zen Buddhist community in America. Teachers have gone way off, indiscriminate sexual liaisons, etc., with students and elsewhere. So this is an issue. Not to mention the sexual scandal of the Roman Catholic Church. Obviously. So you can go way off base here. People who are into a spiritual path, or especially those who have, both in the case of priests in either tradition, who have a spiritual role or some social role, can really go way off base if they're not careful. So that's just a caution, on this whole issue. And then those 5 precepts get enlarged to 10. If I can find this, here they are. This is a very new book which I love, from a guy named Brad Warner, who's an American Zen priest who's lived in Japan. He's just 40 years old. 50. He writes very well, with a lot of insight, very humorously. So this latest book is called "There Is No God, and He's Always With You." It's perfect, right? Because that's what I've been saying this morning. There's no God in the sense of some separate guy sitting up in the sky, apart from the universe, deciding about things. And this is pure projection, even by the standards of Catholic theology, for whom God is infinite and boundless and timeless. So God is not a person in that sense, the way we always imagine a person to be. Because as soon as you say that, you're really creating an idol. And if that's the kind of God you say we have to believe in, or else we're atheists, then I'm an atheist. All right? Because that's not true. It's not the same thing as saying God is impersonal, which is just another concept, and that's clearly not what we mean when we think of impersonal forces. I think the best word, by the way, for this is transpersonal. Reality is transpersonal. It's not, call it personal if you like. By that you mean consciousness and compassion and all of that. But transpersonal is better, because otherwise we think of persons, including ourselves, as these limited, isolated beings. Just as we imagine God to be the biggest, limitless, isolated being, is also a projection. So in that sense, there's no God. But, and, He is always with you. He is always with you. Because you can experience it right here and now, whatever we mean by that. Just don't put any limits on it. Connection to it. Anyway, at one point he reaffirms these 10 precepts. Right? He says, don't kill, don't steal, don't misuse sexuality, don't lie. You've seen those. And don't cloud the mind with intoxicants. Those are the 5 we've just seen. Now notice what he said, don't cloud the mind with intoxicants. So in other words, be responsible. Don't speak of others' errors or faults. Don't gossip, don't calumniate, don't detract. Pretty good. Used to be considered part of the 8th commandment in moral theology. Don't lie. Don't praise yourself and berate others. Good practice to get away from the ego. Don't be covetous. Those last 2 commandments, covet your neighbor's wife and neighbor's goods. Don't give way to anger. Now, there we get into the 7 deadly sins, something of anger. So that's kind of the connection there. Those primitive energies we were talking about before have to be integrated. But we should put more emphasis on anger. But Jesus did, clearly. We just had the reading in the Gospel, both yesterday or the day before and a few Sundays ago, about whoever even gets angry with the brother and sister is liable to judgment. Don't let this stuff take root in the heart. The seeds of anger, the seeds of murder, get planted in the heart through anger and hatred. One of the three poisons: anger, hatred, greed, and ignorance. And don't disrespect the Buddha, the Buddhist teachings, or the Buddhist community, which are the three treasures you mentioned earlier: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, the teaching, and the community. So those are some of the rules, in the Buddhist tradition, which is useful to see how they correspond, how they re-emphasize some things that we don't, and etc. Again, Bernie points out when it says right intention, right conduct, right effort, what right really comes down to is don't have it. That's okay. Don't tell that to your 17-year-old, but for you, it can mean don't have any preconceived notions in a situation of what is definitely absolutely right, because you have to be able to respond, to what the situation actually is. I mean, you can sometimes kill. Well, show me a situation where you think you can, and we'll talk about it. On the battlefield, self-defense. All right, that brings us to another thing. This is something Paul Nitter speaks about in his book, Without Good I Cannot Be a Christian. One of the major things on the moral level where Buddhism has a lot to show us and to help us with is nonviolence. As part of the hatred, part of that, anger thing. This is, of course, the Hindus have this as well, Mahatma Gandhi, etc. And this, Martin Luther King was a very good example in our own time, and coming from a purely Christian, tradition. Look, there's no way, and St. Augustine partly, tried to give rules where it's okay to fight, just war, all that kind of thing. But Jesus is really clear in his teaching and very clear in his death. How we behave in the face of violence is you don't resist the one who is evil in that sense. Ever find a situation and we talk about it, or we respond spontaneously. You probably defend, your kids against an aggressor, right? But how and to what extent? Necessary force. I mean, all sorts of issues come up. But the ideal, nonetheless, has to be fundamentally nonviolence, because violence begets violence. Jesus said himself at the time of his passion, you raise the sword, you die by the sword. Violence begets violence. And yes.
I was just going to say that John Deere,
Yes.
who wrote The Nonviolent Life, is coming to St. Richard
Oh,
in
good.
Manchester.
Yeah, John Deere is a former Jesuit now, unfortunately, but he's the greatest, one of the greatest theological spokespersons today for that social nonviolence.
And it really does push you hard.
Yeah.
About what is the extent to which you can let go of violence.
Yeah, there's the issue of violence, clearly, and Jesus is so clear. Turn the other cheek. I mean, I know there are some modern interpretations of that which are interesting, but clearly the thrust of his whole teaching is that you just don't repay violence for violence. That even if it means you get killed, it's better to do that, to allow that, than to be violent yourself. Lots of buts, but
Isn't one of the big differences between Christianity and Buddhism that Christians talk about violence against other humans and Buddhists talk about violence against sentient creatures?
Well, that's an interesting point. I think today, and even in our Christianity, we're becoming more aware of ecological responsibility and planetary responsibility, stewardship of the planet, which is a very good thing. That's why St. Francis of Assisi was named by Pope John Paul the patron saint of ecology, to wake us up to this dimension, that we need to be nonviolent, yes, towards all sentient beings. Now, even Bernie talks about it in his book talking about this do not kill precept. You have a hamburger, you're a killer. You have lettuce, you kill. So I mean, there's no way to avoid it entirely. But that's where, you know, the counsel, prudence, where the discernment comes in. But Jesus is very clear in his life, and I said, even allowing himself to be killed, which is exactly what Jesus did, and which is exactly, as I said before this morning, what redeemed the world, that he didn't react with violence and hatred and anger, you know, towards those who were violent and angry and hateful towards him. And not only was that an effective spiritual strategy, you know, but it redeemed the world in Christian terms. It changed everything. It let loose a current that could transform the whole universe. That's what we Christians say. I don't think it's too far-fetched. But that's how far that went. But I think that was what was operative and how it was operative. So, to put it perhaps a little more clearly, even if in some cases, say a soldier on the battlefield, somehow has considered that this is the way for him to sacrifice for others and to be who he's supposed to be, can never have hatred in his heart. Even if you're being externally violent, you cannot never be hateful. So to dehumanize the other or brutalize the other, you know, whatever you want to call them, books or krauts or whatever, you know, the dehumanizing element of hate, you know, and hateful action is, or action that stems simply from hate, like bombing of Dresden or, I would say, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All these things are terrible. You cannot do those. And that just creates such poison, to call them what Buddhists do, poison in the universe, and in one's own heart, that you can never do that. In his book, Paul Nieder quotes the example of talking to Bernie. It was actually to Bernie Glassman, whom I just mentioned, because Paul was previously, and maybe even still, very active in the liberation movement in El Salvador, and you know, dealing with the death squads down there at a certain period in history. You know, Bernie said, okay, go and do that work, but just remember you are the death squads. That's not a good way to approach it. You are the enemy. As I said earlier, you are the terrorists. After 9/11, Sensei Janet Ables was another successor of Hiroshi Kennedy. We lived across the street from each other at the time, across the street from St. Joseph's Parish where I was. She has her house. Right after 9/11, we were talking, and she said that, well, remember, we're the terrorists. That's a really hard pill to swallow for most people, but when you realize the interconnectedness of everything, and that what happens in your heart is spread over the universe, what happens in others' heart is already in your heart, all that kind of thing, it's very challenging and liberating at the same time. Another reason you can't hate is just hating yourself. Kind of love your neighbor as yourself, or hate your neighbor as yourself. Yes.
It seems like, you know, with Buddhism, with centering prayer, awakening, you feel the pain of the world so much more, and therefore the greater compassion.
That's right.
Therefore the wanting to, like with Buddhism, doing the taking and the giving, pulling in the pain and exhaling it out, and entering into the redemptive act of Jesus. That interconnectedness is felt so much more strongly.
Right, and then as you're saying, when you're really present to others and listening to others and connecting to others, as Bernie was saying about those three precepts, the three initial precepts, then you're continually walking in their moccasins, seeing things from their point of view, and that also enables you to realize, wow, well, they have their reasons. The Palestinians and the Israelis, the Jews, could actually listen to each other. There could actually be some progress. But it's always, no, my group has been wounded by your group, and I'm going to retaliate, and this is, as we see, totally fruitless. So that's the kind of thing we need to have more of.
One thing the country's getting better at is we're doing away with our murdering of our prisoners. There are still Texas, I guess, is still big on that. But another one in the Bible, this is humorous. What was the first, when Jesus did his first miracle, he created wine at the wedding.
Yeah.
Turned water into wine, so see.
Well, I often preach on that. I say,
that's a good one.
I say, imagine what I would have been taught. Jesus would have said, you know, all right, look at you guys. You've been drinking for a couple days already at this wedding. You've had enough. Go home. Sober up. You know, don't make a spectacle of yourself. Instead, he made 150 gallons of the best wine so that people could continue to drink. Now, wasn't that say something about morality? You know, where the issue really is? And in that case, it would have been responsible, you know, drink and enjoy yourself. So it's important, and of course it's all symbolic also of the wine of the kingdom and the messianic banquet. Just right here and now, at any moment of the day, you can quaff a jug of wine just by being alive, in the metaphorical sense, which is a real sense here. There's actually a koan about that in that same collection I mentioned earlier, where one master says to another, "Oh, I'm so poor, what can you do for me?" It's a little Dharma trap, little duel that they were going on to. And he said, "What are you complaining about? You've already had 3 cups of the best wine in China." And that's what he meant. You're alive right here and now, and so you're already drunk on life. So what do you say you're poor? You're so rich. Which is one of the great paradoxes that St. Paul said, we possess nothing, yet everything is ours, as he told the Corinthians. The same with all of us. The less we possess and hold on to, the more everything is ours, the more we're connected to everything. So a lot of texts, become luminous, come alive when you see its interconnectedness with other traditions and other truths. Yes?
I'm going to bring up the 800-pound gorilla of violence, and that's the Holocaust. How could that have been stopped?
Well, that's a good question. If people had really been attentive, whether in Germany or the United States or elsewhere, to respond spontaneously to the actual need, I bet it would have been stopped.
Right, but that's not practical, in the sense people don't do that.
Well, who said we can go back and say, well, what we should have done, we shouldn't have allowed that to happen.
Oh, I see, to prevent.
But it did happen, and why? Well, that we can't know unless we just. The only thing we can do there, well, at least at this distance, certainly the only thing we can do is what I think Jesus or the Buddha does, not would have done. Is connect to the pain. Somehow realize that that's our human story, and we are one with it. And let that affect us the way it needs to. And then that'll help determine our response to situations, critical situations like that. Whether it's the next genocide as we had in Rwanda or elsewhere, as things come forward.
Just perfect. To piggyback on that is that one of the things that's always turned me off about Christianity, what led me in my path to Buddhism in the first place, was the violent aspect, the allowance of violence. And whenever I hear of the Jesus teaching about turning the sheep and carry the pack a mile longer, it always connects me instantly. And specifically the Holocaust, or any Holocaust, there's been many Holocausts. I may not get it exactly right, but that doesn't matter. Buddha said he abused me, he kicked me, he beat me, he robbed me. In those who harbor such thoughts, hatred never ceases. Mm-hmm. Hatred only ceases by love. This is the old rule. And it's exactly what Jesus is saying: hatred begets hatred, love begets love.
No, there really isn't. Fundamentally, there isn't. They're both revolutionary, and they're both saying the same thing. We're talking about Judas and Buddha in terms of human conduct, about compassion, love, and forgiveness.
You distinguish between the individual, you and I, avoiding violence, versus the society collectively protecting itself, protecting its children from violence, using violence to protect the society.
Yeah, and you have to really, really, really be careful of that. Yeah. Because what an individual would never do, you can justify in a mob, whether it's a soccer stadium or in a country. And that really, in itself, is not acceptable. So we really have to examine ourselves. Well, it doesn't matter, I'm not doing it, but I'm doing it for some greater good. Well, really? Are you sure? And what is that good? And in any case, there is such a thing as mob violence and the whole. Well, not to get too esoteric about it, but there's whole beings created that govern people's behavior at that time. That's what we mean actually by demons on that scale, that take over ideology, create ideology, and pursue ideology, and supposedly in the name of something greater, but it turns out to be monstrous. Whether you're talking about destroying whole peoples in the promised land, or you're talking about destroying whole peoples today, it's the same kind of phenomenon, I believe.
What about, you just said the greater good and triggers and thoughts.
Who defines that?
Yeah, but the thing is sometimes it's quite obvious what, like if you did an action it would not be for the greater good. It might be good for you, but it may not be for the best.
Well, it wouldn't be good for you either, probably.
Probably, well, I don't know, certain situation, I'm thinking, but, you know, but anyways, I know what you're saying, and it doesn't impact regardless, even on myself, which don't like to make it. But when you say the greater good, isn't it so dangerous because?
Yes, it is.
Because you're thinking like, well, what is the greater,
Yeah.
who is that greater good for?
Exactly, yeah. It's very dangerous to
Is
use
it
that
for
phrase.
you?
Same as using a phrase like collateral damage or national
Right.
security
Right.
or some greater good like that. You know, we have to be very careful. And
In other words, careful that it's not your greater good.
or even a collective greater good. As soon as you make the collective some kind of being that doesn't have responsibility anymore, like a corporate person, you know, this kind of nonsense, then you're really going to get stuff that's dangerous. You know.
Like the old Bob Dylan song, "With God on our side, he could use violence to justify."
Oh yeah, I love that. God is on our side. You know? Whether you're talking about a football team or a country, really? God doesn't take sides.
I don't even like it when we're offering the prayers during Mass and we just pray for our truth. That even bothers me
Yeah,
sometimes.
you're right.
We should be praying for
Or
everyone's
many
healing.
instead of the all.
That's right. Totally right. Totally right. Yeah.
I gotta pin you down. Adam Lanza goes into Newtown School
Yeah.
and starts shooting toddlers. And I have a gun and I shoot him, which
Mhm.
if I hadn't, I was there, I would have.
Mhm.
What's your reference?
I wasn't there. If you're in that situation and that's what it seems right for you to do, well, then do it.
Okay.
But it might not. It might not be the way you're supposed to do it. I can't say.
All right.
It could easily not be the right way.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got a fundamental presumption in favor of nonviolence. But then, you know, the limit situations are always difficult. You know, how about just doing it in your daily life and see what happens from there? You know, see how your own heart is transformed and how your own conduct is transformed. You know, it's, yeah, or before we.
I guess I wonder, you know, Jesus was against violence, the Buddha was against violence, Muhammad is against violence. We are such a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Why does our country allow violence and propagate violence? I mean, I think your people have been killed in the name of God.
Well, of course, I don't think we're a Christian country at all.
Okay, good.
I mean, I think individuals are trying to follow.
We're seen as a Christian nation. We're seen as the biggest Christian
It becomes an
nation.
ideology then to assert ourselves over others, you know, and to
And
defend
that's what it is.
freedom or some other thing we call freedom,
It's the power.
which is
of
taking away everybody else's freedom. But I don't want to get too political now. But yeah, we have to be very careful with, you know, as a church, as a nation, any group has to be very, very careful that they don't have their group personality and group ideology that takes over, because that's demonic. It easily becomes demonic, and I mean that literally. It's demonic. In that perspective, let me point out, you know, there are one or two more points I want to make before we break for lunch. We spoke about we spoke about Buddha as a saint. Many of the bodhisattvas, etc., especially you have in Tibetan Buddhism, they speak a lot more about this than we do in Zen, but it's still the same universe. We speak about Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion in Sanskrit, and that becomes, as many of you know, becomes Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion, as a sex change there, which is interesting. And to Kannon, also the female goddess of compassion in Japanese Zen tradition. And you'll find people, and I've seen it in my travels, people who have Kuan Yin, an image of Kuan Yin on their windowsill, maybe right next to Mao, but in any case, it's there. The same way that Christians do have the Virgin Mary. And I think there's a correspondence here. Let me make clear, when we're talking about these bodhisattvas, or the bodhisattvas, the Dhyani Buddhas, the 5 Dhyani Buddhas in the Tibetan meditation tradition, which represent different energy centers in the body, or Vishnu, or any of these figures, they're not demons, contrary to what has often been said in the past. Demons are some of the gods of Canaan and all these projections that we create of our own anger and hatred and violence. The gods, the ancient world that needed human sacrifice, all that kind of thing. Those are demonic, and they weren't created by God. They were created by us. That's important to realize. They're self-generated demons, generated by the group. That's kind of esoteric, but I just want to put that out there. On the contrary, these forces that are actually forces for good and transformation and love, it's called goddess of compassion, but it's not a god. It's let's be clear, in human terms, in Christian terms, or as I think Islamic terms too, they're angels. All right, they're angels. They're angelic powers. They're energy centers that are actually operative in the universe for good, and which can be encountered and integrated into our spiritual practice. I think that's very liberating and very constructive, to realize that. Only if you're comfortable, and only if you feel called to it, and better with direction, better with someone to guide you here. But all of those things are actually present, and available, and are operative, in the universe for our growth. Say, are they separate from? Do angels exist? Are they separate from God? Are they separate from us? Well, if we say that God isn't actually a single separate person up there somewhere, who's not separate from anything, including you, well, he's not separate from them either. But do you exist separately? Well, to the extent that you exist separately, so do they. Are they separate from you? Well, if you're not separate, then they're not separate from you or from God. So, are they real? Are you? Same answer, same question. To the extent that you are, or we are, or they are, constellations of energy at work that have congealed in a certain configuration, yes, you and they are real. And you're not separate, either from them or from each other, or, for that matter, from God. And we'll talk more about that, specifically in relation to Buddha and Christ, our topic this afternoon. But I do want to put that out there. Any quick reactions to that?
Can you speak more about the evil in a group that happens?
As I say, it's kind of esoteric, but it really was illuminating for me to learn this, and I've come across it in several sources. The word that's used in the esoteric tradition is egregore, which literally means something that's awake, but not in the good sense. Something that's awakened, something that's brought into being. Even on the individual level, what we call demons that possess us, that take us over, in obsessive compulsive behavior and in violence and habits of violence, etc., are generated by ourselves, by our own actions. They're not demons that come out from the outside that exist independently and take us over. No, that's not how it works. They're coming from within. Now they can be purged and purified, but that's where they're coming from. A fortiori, even more is that the case, with the group demonic. The whole group is generating this. So if you like, there's a whole demon of Nazism or a demon of Stalinism, or there can also be a demon of churches, religious groups. We certainly have it in Islam. You have it in the history of Christianity. Talk about violence. It can afflict any group, and maybe even more of those who think that they're being religious or have a special mission. When you're talking about Hitler or what. So, and these are really powerful forces. And that's one reason why the group think is so powerful, because you literally are possessed by a group think, by this force that's actually real. As I say, it's kind of an esoteric point, but I've come to be quite convinced of it myself. And I've given talks on this too. There are talks of mine in which I gave a talk in Colorado, which is now on YouTube, 2 evenings, in which I talked counter along the way, and it addresses some of these issues I just brought up, both about the good forces and the evil ones. If you want to check that out.
When was that? When did you get that?
In January. in
Mission?
Colorado, yes. Thanks to Judy, it's up there on YouTube. So sometimes you have 4 hours to.
I might have misheard something. Did you say Buddhism has something similar to, I guess, the chakras, the energy centers in the body?
They adopted the fundamental worldview, maybe even reincarnation, which we may talk about or not, from Hinduism. So yes, they basically follow the chakra system, which, as I say, is may have come from Hinduism, but it's just what's natural. The same way you can speak about Zen meditation being from the Buddhist tradition, but it's just what's natural, just being present to reality. So there's nothing cultic or anything sectarian about it. It's just what's real. That's why you shouldn't be afraid of it. So yes, for example, the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, the 5 kind of angelic powers that are used in Tibetan meditation. 5 of them correspond to 5 of the chakras, the crown and the ajna, the throat and the heart and the navel. You can search that out and research that if you want.
Thank you.
It's very useful if you feel drawn to that. Preferably, as I say, under guidance.
You got into it, rebirth or reincarnation, and from not being awakened, that you're sort of, the Buddhists say you're condemned to rebirth.
This is all a really tricky subject, which even Buddhists, contemporary Buddhists, for example, like Dry Warren, disagree with a lot of that. In any case, even the Zen tradition reminds us that once you're enlightened, karma disappears. How could it not? Because you're totally connected to everybody and everything, so it's fine. So we can over-exaggerate that. We can exaggerate that kind of thing. What I do want to say, and I had planned to say this just before lunch, so we just have these few minutes now. Speak about resurrection, or at least life after death. Well, of course, Buddhism does not deny this, but it denies the way we set it up. As you can guess, life after death. Well, if everything's right now, and everything is really a continual process of dying and rising, as we Christians supposedly say very clearly, but don't live, then, physical death is just one more stage on the journey, which we should be used to by now. As Richard Rohr says, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. If you learn how to die every day to your tiny little self, well, when you actually just physically part the veil, well, then you're fine. You're so used to the process. It's not traumatic anymore. We're not, not as much as it would be. There's, for example, the koan just before the one about the stick that I spoke about earlier in that collection, the Mamonkan, asks, it's just Tesotsu's 3 barriers. And they're basically about this question. What is your true nature right now? Or, when you die and the eyes are closing and the elements dissolve, where are you? And unless you know, you won't be able to answer. But you would know from having the experience. Same thing as the famous koan, what was your face before you were born? Or what was your face before your parents were born? Another way it's put. That's interesting, right? Because it's saying, in this eternal one, before there are any generations of any kind, and before you and your little individuality and your one little body and your one little mind, who are you? Anything? Anybody? Who? And the answer is, who? It. Whatever it is. He. Who? That's who. And if that doesn't make any sense, well, keep practicing. When there's only just life, even if it's the result of dying, or especially if it's the result of dying, there's life. And that's what we Christians call, Jesus says, I am the life. God is life, Christian theology. Life itself, well, that's what we're connecting to. There's always life. You can't escape it right now. And whether the now is now or the now is after you physically die, does it matter? All traditions really bear witness to this. Life is a lot more than we think, and you're a lot more than you think because you're thinking it. And that's which always limits it. Yes?
Can you touch on the modern growth of atheism and how people are denying the spiritual dimension?
Well, I don't know if they're denying the spiritual dimension. There are lots of ways we can tie into that. Even people like Sam Harris, denied, the evangelical God, which I deny too. They say, well, what about, the things that the Buddhists are looking to? And I'm saying, no, look at what we Christians have always been pointing to, but we've lost sight of in our own tradition. In other words, a God which is not, just the big vindictive dude sitting up on the throne, but actually, wow, something, someone, some reality which we can actually discover, I don't say connect with, but discover our connection with. Discover that we're already connected. How could we not be? If we, as we say, we come from God, we're going to God. So I believe that where most of the atheist movement comes from is from a misunderstanding of what God is. I'm probably an atheist in many of the senses they are, as I just said. But also, and more importantly, I think it comes from a lack of experience. A lack of experience of this dimension, hopefully which they will be able to access from all sorts of paths, even work, or art, or nature, or love of any kind, or spiritual practice of any kind, that they'll be able to access the experience which will then give them a sense of who they really are and who this God that we keep talking about really is. And don't forget, we don't know God's name. We can't give any name to this. Some of the angels have God's name because they're close to God, but they're just revealed names too. Even I am is just a name. And the word God is the most inadequate of all because, as I've said before, that's a job description, not a name. It would be as if I were to say to you, oh, hello teacher, or hello accountant, or hello, banker. That's not your name. Well, God is a job. It's not a name. So be very careful with throwing that around. Any other question before we stop?
Well, I was just going to say, in answering his question, I see the move towards atheism as people who are rejecting, not God, but they are rejecting the brick and mortar, the rules, the images that have been
restricted
created.
God.
The restricted God is as the organized religions have put out.
Yeah, and as I say, the rules have their place in the first half of life, and primarily in the first half of life, and they're subsumed, assumed, into a second half of life into something bigger. They're not rejected as such. But yeah, we have to move, and the churches have not done, in any tradition, not just Christian, have not done a good job, in presenting, the deeper mystical. Maybe the two, first of all, they haven't received it themselves. Priests don't learn this stuff in seminary. Even how to pray, really. I don't think. And then, of course, they can't pass on what they don't have. So it's not just a fear of giving too esoteric stuff to people who aren't ready. It's just because they don't know what they're talking about. They don't even know it's there. So it's a big challenge. But that's why I think doing things like this, and which is becoming more and more common, will help to share the riches that we have. Okay?
I was curious about that. Is contemplative prayer now part of seminary training?
Well, you have to go there and find out. My impression is, I really don't know what they teach. Maybe they teach some Ignatian meditation. I'm not sure. But I'd be willing to bet that they don't teach centering prayer or anything like that, which is a little off the charts of what the usual, what seems to be along the path. So, but it's really important to have an intellectual, psychological, and spiritual formation. I don't think any of those dimensions is being properly addressed in training today.
The only place that I know of through contemplative outreach where the Cardinal, Hadley, and the Archbishop of Manila, they asked Grace Padilla and her whole group in the Philippines to go into the seminaries and teach century prayer.
See? He was educated by the Jesuits, right? Cardinal Judy's from the Philippines. He wasn't a Jesuit himself, though, right? No, but he was educated by the Jesuits. And, of course, they teach prayer, which is why I'm so glad we have a Jesuit Pope, by the way.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Because he's trained in prayer. He's trained in discernment. He's trained in listening. Wow. then you really got a chance to, the Holy Spirit can get in there.
Yes.
All right, on that note, we'll adjourn for lunch. Thank you, and we'll come back at 2:30, and we'll do some Zen and talk about Jesus and Buddha more directly. All right?